welcome to the Shema podcast series, Strive for Truth. This series is based on the teachings of Rabbi Eliyahu Dessler, one of the most profound Torah thinkers of the early 20th century. In these conversations, I'm joined by Rabbi Michael Cohen, a longtime student and teacher of his work. This is not a series about inspiration or quick takeaways. It's about clarity, learning to see reality honestly and aligning our lives with what is real. Welcome back to the Shema podcast, my friends, and our next installment in our ongoing amazing series that I'm really enjoying and growing from, Strive for Truth with Rabbi Michael Cohen. Today's topic is something we can all relate to, something that when it comes to decision making, we're all infected in various levels with some form of bias. You can see today in the world how the news media have really taken on and really made confirmation bias a major part of their business model. It's caused them to thrive. It's caused a lot of division in the country, but it's caused their business models to thrive. It's so disturbing to some degree, although maybe comical. Depending on which news channel you watch, if you're living in the United States of America, and I'm sure wherever country you're listening to this from, it's probably similar in your host nation as well. But based off the news channel, you're living in a totally different world. Like now in the United States, if you're watching CNN, we are living in like some futuristic dystopia. Like the world is coming to an end. Everything is this is the most miserable place to live is the United States of America. If you watch Fox News, this is the greatest time to be an American, the greatest time to be alive. America is asserting itself, its strength, it's creating prosperity. It's like literally two different worlds depending upon which news channel, and they know that too. And they play into this confirmation bias where people don't like to challenge assume truths they believe to hold dear to them. And so we naturally want to go towards where we're getting fed information that confirms what we believe to be true. And and we come across information we don't believe that fits in with our world narrative, then we immediately dismiss it. But of course, this is problematic. This keeps us from finding truth. And this is something Rav Dessler points out. So we're going to get to the bottom of this and delve in deep. Rabbi Cohen, thank you once again for being in the Shema podcast studio and teaching us from this amazing text. I'll turn it over to you. We know the issue. Bias, it impacts all of us. What does Rav Dessler teach us about this very important topic?
Great. Thank you once again. Thank you, Dan, for having me and inviting me to be here. It's a real privilege. Rabbi Dessler here in the Roots of Mussar. It's interesting once again, Rabbi Carmel, when arranging Strive for Truth and the book Michtav Eliyahu, put this right after the first introduction to the attribute of loving kindness. You'll remember, I hope, from last week, we talked about the metacognition, right? Listening to ourselves and seeing how we are thinking. And I gave the example of a person walking into a supermarket, like which aisle do you go down to get to the back of the supermarket? There's a choice you're making there all the time, which tells you a little bit about yourself and what motivates you. So here, Rabbi Dessler deals with what's called, this essay is called The Roots of Mussar. The Root of Mussar. Mussar is really metacognition, understanding how we think and what we're thinking about. And he starts out with this idea that if one were to carry out any scientific experiment, the first thing you'd have to do is calibrate your instruments. You're going to measure something with a ruler. You're going to make sure that a centimeter or an inch is an inch and it's not off, or you're using a scale. You want to calibrate the scale to make sure that it knows how to weigh something, that it's going to weigh something correctly. And so too with our minds. Our minds are scientific instruments of highest degree, which are constantly measuring and judging and evaluating the world around us. So we are all the time in this world judging situations, people, faces, experiences, scenery, everything that surrounds us. And therefore it's very important for us to know how that our minds are calibrated and are working correctly and not giving too much weight to one thing over another thing. That's the outset of this essay.
Right, exactly. And he brings up, some verses from the Torah with regard to advice the Torah gives or instructions to sages and judges and those who actually make these types of cases, and many different examples of how the slightest little event in someone's life can totally distort and bias them from having true clarity in judging a situation.
So he says that when considering our minds and the fact that our brains are maybe calibrated or miscalibrated at any time, it's important for us to be aware of where we're at in our thinking. There is a concept over here which I think is important to introduce now, and that is that we are really not our brains. There was a guy his name was Dr. Jack Schwartz. He was a psychiatrist, and he was making a movie about somebody who had OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. He had something which is it was back in 2011. By now it's common, which is called a dynamic MRI, which is where they take an MRI of a person and you can see exactly where the brain is firing when they hear certain stimuluses or even conversations. And there was an actor, I forget his name, he won an award for his part in this movie about someone who was OCD, who had to act out being OCD. And he dealt with OCD people for 25 years. He was an expert in OCD. And with this dynamic MRI, he was able to see the part of the brain that was firing when a person was having an OCD event. And he was able to train this actor to act as if he was OCD. And this actor was very good at it. He actually won an award in this movie for his part as playing this OCD person. When they did it's called a functional MRI. They did a functional MRI on this actor while he was acting, and they noticed that his brain was firing where the person would be having an OCD event, which is amazing. And this man, Jack Schwartz, who was the Dr. Jack Schwartz, in 2011 wrote a book, and he said, this is going to change the world. He said, well, this book is going to change the world. Everyone's going to see that you are not your brain, because you can actually decide if you want to be OCD. You could change your brain to becoming an OCD brain. So obviously you're not your brain, you're something else. This is proving all the meditation work that people do is productive, and prayer and the soul. This is a proof that we have a soul. Because if you're not your brain, who are you? You're your soul. You're not your brain. Your brain is thinking things, but that's not who you are. So you can see on YouTube presentations that he made in 2012 where he said this is going to change. He was really euphoric. It's unfortunate that you see him 2014, there's the same YouTube videos, and he's saying, I thought this was going to change the world, but it didn't, because the message didn't catch on.
It just didn't catch on.
It just didn't catch on. But I believe that what he's saying, and many, many people do agree with what he's saying, scientifically, we are not our brain. Our brain functions. Our brain's a muscle that uses and evaluates, and we have to realize that that's not us.
Right. There were some documentaries that came out around that time period too called The Ghost in the Machine, meaning scientists really don't know what gives us our consciousness, because the brain itself does not do so. And I think too, as well as we're seeing with the advent of AI, and we're seeing a lot of those cognitive abilities exported to a machine that's operating off, zeros and ones, and really is not self-aware at all. It's just reacting to patterns. All that's evolving so Hashem can convey to us that we are not our brain. It's just a tool that our neshama has access to when it's in this world.
Right, and many people are abdicating their decision making to AI. Right, they're giving it over, which is such a tragedy. And really, Rabbi Dessler is talking to that here, because he said, if we think about it, when you think about something, you only think about something that you're actually interested in. So, for example, I talked about walking or looking through a newspaper last week. If scrolling or turning on the channel, turning on to CNN or Fox, you decide, you choose in advance which newscast, which news feed you're going to listen to. So there's already an interest from the beginning. There's an innate bias that we're living with automatically. We ask a question. I mean, I was a rabbi for many years, right? But somebody comes to ask you, is it permitted to do this? Well, obviously they're asking, I want to do this. Can I? So it's you as a rabbi, you're already you got your back up against the wall. A guy's already saying, I want to do this. Can I do it? They don't ask in that way. You say, is it permitted to do this on Shabbos? Can you ride your bike on Shabbos? Oh, no, you can't. But the question is, the person saying, I want to ride my bike on Shabbos. That's the thing. We live with innate biases, innate things we want to do, and then we want to fit the world around what we want to do. And Rabbi Dessler is really asking the question, I think it's an obvious question, is that really the way to operate? Is that a good way to operate in the world, where you run and you're guided by what you want, you're running your whole life by what you want, or is there another, should we be thinking about what's the right thing to do?
Right, especially considering all the programming, or the majority of the programming that goes into our mind and creates all our biases and desires has all been on autopilot. Like we have zero decision-making control over how we want our mind programmed. It just gets fed at a very young age and ongoing. So, right, we obviously want to know how to actually override all of this.
Right. So, Rabbi Dessler, at the beginning, this essay is really just bring us an awareness of the fact that we might be innately flawed in our decision-making process. And if one is confronted with that, so then you got to start thinking, right? How can I refine my decision-making thinking? How can I be aware of my decision-making thinking? How should I actually go about making decisions in my life?
When I contemplated this, I kept thinking, like, Hashem puts way too much responsibility in our hands because we're so built with so many flaws built in. It seems like almost an insurmountable task to get everything operating in a way that's proper and is seeking truth.
Yeah, right. So he mentions this idea, this the beautiful idea that there's a prohibition in the Torah. It says, "V'lo tikach shochad," a person should not take a bribe because a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise. So there's this idea, it says it blinds the eyes of the wise. What about the eyes of the person who's not so wise? Well, the idea is, yeah, of course, and all the more so. But even the wise, even the person who the Torah, God himself is testifying, this person is a wise person. Nevertheless, it says he's going to be subjective and he will not be able to be objective in a decision. He'll be subjective due to a bribe that might take. The word shochad, actually, which is the word for bribe in the Torah, in Hebrew, shochad comes from the concept of shehuchad. You become at one with the person who gives to you. That a person receives a gift from somebody else, right? So then they all of a sudden become connected to that person. And it's very difficult for them to see negativity in that person because they just gave them a gift. And so that's the power of a bribe. That's the power of a gift. And the person should be wary of that. And that's why the pasuk, the verse says in Proverbs, that taking a gift actually is not life because it actually limits your ability to choose, because now you've taken a gift, you're invested in this place or in this person or in this campaign because they gave you some even worthless trinket, but now you're at one with them. And that's why every campaign and every advertising project will give you some sort of, tchotchke or something, some bling that you can take with you, and then now you're invested and you're part of the program.
He cites several stories, but I do remember hearing a story that's probably from the Gemara that there was a rabbi on his way to court and someone moved out of his way as he was walking across the bridge and let him pass through first, and that person ended up being in his court.
Yes, Rabbi Shmuel bar Yossi, and then he recused himself from that case. And then he thought, you know what, let me stand outside and listen to the case and see if I could have been impartial. And while he's listening to the case, he says, he could argue this, he should have argued that, he could have won if he'd have argued that. And he saw, he noticed that he was being partial to that person because he had given him a gift. And that's what's so scary about this, that even a great rabbi, even people who are judges and people who are learned, and they know sometimes have to recuse themselves from making a decision because they are invested in the case.
Something in the field of sales is studied and used to a very large degree, this idea, the desire to reciprocate whenever someone does something for you. So yes, it's built in, it's our default. So how does he teach us to identify this? And God willing, hopefully find a way of correcting it.
Yeah, so that's a tall order, really. In reading this essay, it's a little bit disconcerting because you come there and you think like, so how are we supposed to get through this? So he says, if not here, in other places, there's one concept that Rabbi Dessler it runs throughout is the concept of what he calls the Nekudas HaEmes, the point of truth that is in each person. In the Hasidic world, they talk about the Pintel Yid, right? The actual truth, the neshama that is right deep down inside us. So each person has within them the spark of God, right? We're a Salam Elokim. Each person is a product of Hashem's breath. And so when one is able to really get true and get honest, be honest with oneself and go down to what do I really want, who really am I, one can actually get to the Nekudas HaEmes, to the truth, and one can actually find the truth in a case of dilemma. But it's very important. The first last step is an awareness that one might be biased, that one's brain is not necessarily impartial, and that we're actually working with a machine that is not calibrated. But when one has that recognition, then one says, "Oh, okay. So now let's go. What's the real truth? What's the real correct thing to do in this situation?" That's one way. The other way is to go to somebody who's wiser, who can have an objective view of the situation and will not be swayed. Which is it's possible to find a rebbe, a teacher, an advisor, a parent, who can say objectively that this is the right thing to do. That's another way. The other thing he warns at the end of this chapter, he warns against, is if you want to really know if the decision that you're making is the correct decision, if the process that you went through was the correct process, if it's something which was on a whim, and this is what he maintains, if it was a first thought, just fell into your mind and you said, "Oh, yeah, let's do that," chances are it's not not the right thing. Now, that might run counter to other people. I know Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book called Blink, which is different than that. But he said the first thing that comes into mind might not necessarily be the right thing. And it might be an idea that might be correct to examine more. But if the process took time and took effort and was earnest, you'll come to the right decision. That's the conclusion of this chapter. That if you are earnest about it and you're honest with yourself and you acknowledge the fact that you might be biased and there might be things that are swaying you in the wrong direction, and you're working hard to come to the right decision that's best, and your intentions are intentions of giving and bringing Kiddush Hashem to the world, chances are you'll come to the right answer.
So it sounds like it's pretty much a process of accepting with humility that we're biased, and then basically asking for Hashem's help in drawing the right conclusion. Is basically asking him to intervene in the situation because we lack clarity without him.
Right, and this idea of asking for prayer, asking for divine help. We're making important decisions. It's very, very important. Thank you for mentioning that.
But we're making so many countless decisions throughout the day. I know the big ones we typically contemplate and ask for assistance on, but I mean, throughout the day, we're making countless decisions. You mentioned one thing of, when it comes to halakha and things of that nature, or even I think any advice, having a rabbi that you can go to because they are definitely outside the situation. They're not biased. They can give you clarity and tell you exactly what the Torah says to do in that situation. But you're right. We probably do come to rabbis like you had and say, all right, here's the outcome I want. Tell me what Torah I can use to justify me going in this direction.
Right. So you've got to have a rabbi who you feel comfortable when he'll tell you, no, actually, that would be the wrong thing to do. You cannot ride a bike on Shabbos or whatever it may be.
Which I have been in situations where I have not wanted to go to my rabbi for that very reason, because I know he's going to tell me something I don't really want to hear sometimes.
Right.
But that's the way. That's
the honesty. That's the strive for truth, really.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's very interesting. Like in the coaching world, we say, you choose what you want to focus on. That's one thing. It's very interesting just to take a look and see what you're focusing on. And then the next thing you choose is the meaning that you want to give to that thing that you've focused on. That's also personal. It's very interesting to see and understand that that's just the meaning that you've attributed to that thing. But that's not really, and that might be a runaway brain. That might not actually be the truth. So that's when we've got to get to the point where saying, just be observing ourselves in the thought process.
It seems also, too, that it's very easy to draw conclusions on certain matters and then identify with that conclusion, meaning where your identity becomes, which I think is like the danger of labels, because we begin to identify with a set of ideas, and then that causes us to have confirmation bias in that area, versus if the ideas aren't part of our identity, then they're open to be challenged without it being an attack on us. It's like two people, studying Gemara. First thing I know is the first time I went to a yeshiva and I was watching all the yelling taking place. I was like, what are these people so angry at each other for? I asked Rabbi Yokov Wolbe that. It's like everyone was mad at each other, It's like because they're pursuing truth, and when they come to the conclusion, they hug each other. And they have even actually deeper love for each other once they help one see the truth, because they're not identifying with the outcome. They're just pursuing the truth. And you just don't see that in the world around us today at all.
Right. It's not personal.
Right. Exactly. It's nothing personal at all. But here in today's world, ideas become personal attacks if you attack an idea. When you're working with someone, what else do you do to guide them and help them identify where they may be biased, where they're maybe not seeing it? That's what I'm always wondering about. Like, where am I biased that I'm just not even aware of, and that therefore is influencing the decisions that I'm making? Can you give some guidance there?
Yeah, so it really comes often through a series of questions, and you're really asking the person, what is it you really want? They may be saying they're going to do something, or they want to do something, and it might be actually doesn't really fit in with anything else that they've been saying. But so what do you really want? Once one starts drilling down onto what is it you really want, and the person might say, well, it's actually something quite different. They may say it's one of two things. And then you say, well, yeah, but which one is it? What do you really want? And through that form of questioning, of going to what you really want and understanding what's really driving, you may find that they often find that what they really want is something quite different than what we've been talking about for the last 5-10 minutes. And really might be something quite beautiful. And once they really focused on that, they realized that everything else that they've been saying was just mind fog, taking them away from really focusing on what the purpose of their life is and what they really want for themselves, for their family, for their business, for their relationship, whatever it may be. But it's a series of questions drilling down on what is it you really want? And if you get that, then what will it be? Then what? And then what? Till you come to the point when the person has that clarity of this is what they really want and nothing else really matters. This is the way to get it.
And I assume what you're referring to too is just peeling back the layers of the onion, because a lot of times people will say, well, I want this particular job. Well, why do you want that job? Well, because I want this esteem or the financial money that comes with it or whatever it may be. But then you say, well, why do you want that? And you can keep drilling back until you get down to actually desires and will. And that's really, I think, what I've learned so far in my life is that that's really when you start to pinpoint that pintel yid, the neshama. Because in the end, it's like, what does it desire in the end? And a lot of the other stuff is just a lot of fake layers thrown on top of it. Now, I assume in these later essays, we'll be building more on this idea.
Yes, I think really looking into the truth of Yiddishkeit, of the Torah, we're really drilling. I mean, in this essay, what we haven't really discussed is, the other way of refining one's mind is through Torah learning. And when one dedicates oneself to just pure learning Torah, that might be a Gemara, which is totally irrelevant to anything. One's really refining one's mind and refining one's thinking. So how does one calibrate one's brain? One calibrate your brain by learning Torah, by learning Gemara, and that's why you find people learning and studying things which are maybe not even relevant today, right? People are learning Daf Yomi, they're learning about Zavachim and Menachot, they're bringing sacrifices that are brought and the meal offerings that are brought. We're not bringing them now, and even if Hashem, Mashiach will come. Person will say, I'm not a Cohen. I am actually be a Cohen, but person's not a Cohen. I'm not going to be in Beis Mikdash. I'm going to be bringing these sacrifices. Why do I need to learn this? But the point is, you're refining, through learning Torah, one's refining one's mind and refining one's thinking. That's really the antidote. That's what he really leads to, which is character development and Torah learning are how one refines one's mind. Now, the next essays really build on that, on knowing the truth and getting to be comfortable with the truth, because it's not personal. It's just, this is the truth. This is what the Torah wants. And then once you get there, you're really sailing way above, because you recognize you're not your brain, you're your neshama, and there's a truth in the world, and you can refine your brain, and you can actually use it in a positive way if you you using it for Torah, and you're refining your brain, and you're refining your thinking, and you're refining your desires, that you can really excel in this world. That's where he's getting to with these essays and the next couple of essays.
Right, because he's training us that since we're not our mind, we can actually change the programming of our mind. We're not stuck with whatever we think we were born with. There's rewiring that we can do, and the Torah is the mechanism for doing so, because it's basically the perfection. It's the mind of Hashem, if you will. And I think I've read somewhere that it says that Hashem created the Yetzer Hara, which is probably the one that influences our biases, and Hashem created the Torah as the antidote. And I think that's what we're learning here. All this stuff helps us refine the way we think and view the world. But in addition, by just simply recognizing, like the sages used to do before they would judge a case and recuse themselves, saying, just accepting and knowing I am biased.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Thank you.
See you next time.
Thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed the episode and found it meaningful, please take a moment to rate, review, and share the podcast.